In 1877, $1 million could buy you an entire city. It was enough wealth to live like royalty for 10 lifetimes. So when that exact amount disappeared from Cornelius Vanderbilt's private vault, the same night a mysterious young man claiming to be his son vanished from New York City, it became more than just a theft. It became a mystery that would consume 3 generations of America's most powerful family. The man called himself Jacob, and in just 48 hours, he had convinced Vanderbilt's own lawyers that his claim to the family fortune was legitimate. Then he disappeared, leaving behind only a photograph of a woman whose identity would unlock secrets the Vanderbilt family had buried for decades. Where are you watching this story unfold from today? Whether you're in the bustling streets of New York, where this drama began, the quiet suburbs of Connecticut, where secrets were kept, or anywhere across America, where the Vanderbilt name still echoes with power and prestige, you're about to witness one of the most extraordinary inheritance mysteries in American history. If you're fascinated by stories of hidden fortunes and family secrets that shaped our nation, please subscribe and join our community of history enthusiasts who believe that the most incredible stories are often the ones that were meant to stay buried. The year 1877 marked the end of an era. Cornelius Vanderbilt, known to the world as the Commodore, lay dying in his opulent mansion at 10 Washington Place in New York City. At 82 years old, he had built an empire that stretched across America's railroads and steamship lines, accumulating a fortune worth over $100 million, more than the entire federal budget of the United States at that time. But empires built on ambition often hide secrets in their foundations. Vanderbilt's bedroom, decorated with the finest European furnishings money could buy, had become a gathering place for New York's most powerful men. Lawyers, bankers, and railroad executives waited in hushed tones as the old man's breathing grew more labored. His son, William Henry Vanderbilt, stood at the foot of the massive oak bed, already calculating the logistics of inheriting the largest private fortune in American history. None of them knew that 200 miles away, in a modest boarding house in Albany, another man was also preparing for Vanderbilt's death. This man had been waiting for 29 years. What they discovered in that Albany boarding house would challenge everything the world thought it knew about Cornelius Vanderbilt. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. To understand the mystery of Jacob Vanderbilt, we must first understand the secret that began in 1848, when the Commodore was just beginning to build his empire, and a young woman named Catherine Morgan would change his life forever. Catherine Morgan was 19 years old when she first saw Cornelius Vanderbilt step off the steamboat Columbia at the Albany dock on a foggy morning in March 1848. She worked at her family's boarding house, the Morgan Inn, a modest establishment that catered to traveling businessmen and merchants moving goods along the Hudson River. Vanderbilt, then 54 and at the height of his steamboat empire, had chosen the Morgan Inn not for its luxury, which it certainly lacked, but for its discretion. He was in Albany conducting business that required privacy, negotiating railroad acquisitions that his competitors couldn't discover. Catherine possessed an unusual combination of beauty and intelligence that immediately captivated the railroad baron. Unlike the society women of New York, who saw him only as a source of status and wealth, Catherine engaged him in conversations about literature, politics, and the rapidly changing world of American commerce. She had been educated beyond what was typical for a woman of her social class, thanks to a progressive father who believed his daughter deserved the same intellectual opportunities as any son. Their initial business relationship, Catherine managing Vanderbilt's accommodations during his frequent Albany visits, gradually evolved into something deeper. By autumn of 1848, Vanderbilt was extending his stays, sometimes remaining at the Morgan Inn for weeks at a time. The other guests assumed he was conducting complex railroad negotiations. They were half right. Catherine's diary, discovered decades later during the renovation of the Morgan Inn, provides intimate details of their relationship. In her careful, educated handwriting, she describes evenings spent discussing Vanderbilt's vision for American transportation, his frustrations with political interference in his business dealings, and his growing isolation from his wife and family in New York. "He speaks to me as he speaks to no other," she wrote in October 1848. "Not as a woman to be protected or placated, but as an equal mind. He values my thoughts on his business dealings and seeks my counsel on matters that would surprise those who know him only as the hard-driving Commodore." But their relationship would soon face a test that would force both Catherine and Vanderbilt to make choices that would haunt them for the rest of their lives. Because by Christmas 1848, Catherine Morgan was pregnant with Cornelius Vanderbilt's child, and the decision they made about that child would create a secret that would nearly destroy the Vanderbilt empire 30 years later. The winter of 1849 brought unusual secrecy to the Morgan Inn. Catherine's condition became increasingly difficult to hide, and Vanderbilt faced an impossible decision. His marriage to Sophia Johnson Vanderbilt, though not passionate, was essential to his social standing and business relationships. A scandal involving an illegitimate child could damage not only his reputation, but his ability to secure the political connections necessary for his railroad expansion. Yet Vanderbilt's feelings for Catherine were genuine. In a man known for calculating every decision based on profit potential, his actions during this period suggest emotions that transcended financial consideration. In February 1849, Vanderbilt arranged for Catherine to travel to a private residence in Saratoga Springs, where she could give birth away from prying eyes. He hired Dr. Marcus Whitman, a discreet physician who catered to the wealthy families of New York when delicate situations required confidential medical care. On March 12, 1849, Catherine gave birth to a healthy boy. She named him Jacob Morgan, using her maiden name to protect both the child and Vanderbilt's reputation. But Vanderbilt had other plans. The railroad baron spent 3 days with Catherine and his newborn son in Saratoga Springs, 3 days that his business records show as a gap in his usually meticulous schedule. During those days, he made arrangements that would shape the rest of Jacob's life. Rather than abandon the child, as many wealthy men of the era would have done, Vanderbilt established a trust fund and arranged for Jacob to be raised by the Hartwell family in Boston. Thomas Hartwell was a former steamboat captain who had worked for Vanderbilt and could be trusted with absolute discretion. The arrangement was generous by the standards of the time. Jacob would receive a quality education, comfortable living conditions, and upon reaching adulthood would inherit a substantial sum. But there was one condition. Jacob could never claim the Vanderbilt name or attempt to contact his biological father unless specifically summoned. Catherine's diary entries from this period reveal her anguish at giving up her son, but also her understanding of the impossible position they faced. "He has promised me that Jacob will want for nothing," she wrote, "and perhaps it is better this way. A child deserves a father who can acknowledge him publicly, and a mother who can raise him without shame. I cannot give him either." For 28 years, this arrangement held. Jacob grew up as Jacob Hartwell, excelling in his studies, eventually graduating from Harvard Law School, never knowing his true parentage. But in 1877, as Cornelius Vanderbilt lay on his deathbed, a letter would arrive that would shatter this carefully constructed secret. And the contents of that letter would set in motion events that would change American history forever. January 4th, 1877. Snow fell heavily on Boston as Jacob Hartwell sat in his law office reviewing contracts for a local shipping company. At 27 years old, he had established himself as one of the city's most promising young attorneys, specializing in maritime law, a field that seemed to call to him naturally, though he never understood why. The knock at his office door interrupted his work on what would be the last normal day of his life. "Mr. Hartwell, I have a letter for you, sir, from a Mrs. Catherine Morgan." Jacob had never heard the name, but something about it stirred an unfamiliar emotion. The envelope, addressed in an elderly woman's shaking handwriting, felt heavy with importance. Inside was a letter that began with 4 words that would forever change his understanding of himself. "My dearest son, Jacob." Catherine Morgan, now 47 and dying of consumption in a charity hospital in Albany, had decided that the secret she had kept for 28 years could no longer remain hidden. In 12 pages of careful handwriting, she told Jacob the truth about his parentage, his real name, and the fortune that should have been his birthright. "I have lived these years watching from a distance as you grew into the man I always knew you would become," she wrote. "But I am dying, and with death comes the clarity to see that some secrets cause more harm than the truth they were meant to prevent." The letter included documents that Catherine had safeguarded for nearly 3 decades. The original birth certificate listing Cornelius Vanderbilt as Jacob's father, correspondence between Vanderbilt and Thomas Hartwell detailing the arrangement for Jacob's care, and most shocking of all, a sealed letter in Vanderbilt's own handwriting addressed, "To my son Jacob, to be opened upon my death or his 30th birthday, whichever comes first." Jacob's hands trembled as he broke the seal on his father's letter. Vanderbilt's bold handwriting filled 3 pages with an explanation of his decision, an acknowledgement of Jacob's rightful place in the family, and most significantly, details of an inheritance that would make him one of the wealthiest men in America. "If you are reading this," Vanderbilt had written, "then you have learned the truth of your birth. I have provided well for your upbringing and education, but you deserve more than the comfortable life I arranged. You deserve your birthright." The letter went on to detail a secret clause in Vanderbilt's will, known only to the railroad baron himself and hidden in a private safe deposit box at the Manhattan Trust Company. This clause acknowledged Jacob as Vanderbilt's legitimate son and entitled him to half of the entire Vanderbilt fortune, approximately $50 million. But there was a catch. Jacob would have only 60 days from Vanderbilt's death to present his claim, and he would need to do so with specific documents that proved his identity beyond any legal doubt. As Jacob read this requirement, he realized with growing urgency that Cornelius Vanderbilt was reportedly very ill. If the newspaper accounts were accurate, Jacob might have only weeks or even days to claim his inheritance. The race against time was about to begin. Jacob's first instinct was disbelief. The revelation that he was the son of America's wealthiest man seemed too extraordinary to be real. But as he examined the documents Catherine had preserved, their authenticity became undeniable. The watermarks, the official seals, the consistency of handwriting across multiple papers, everything pointed to the truth of Catherine's story. By February 1877, newspaper reports confirmed that Cornelius Vanderbilt's health was failing rapidly. Jacob realized that he had perhaps weeks to present his claim before the window closed forever. He began his preparations methodically, utilizing the legal training that had served him well in Boston. First, he secured certified copies of all documents, storing originals in multiple safe locations. He researched the legal precedents for inheritance claims, studying cases involving legitimacy challenges and family disputes. Most importantly, He began investigating the current Vanderbilt family structure, learning about William Henry Vanderbilt's position as primary heir and the complex web of business relationships that supported the family empire. On February 28, 1877, Jacob received the news he had been dreading. Cornelius Vanderbilt had died at his New York mansion, surrounded by his official family and business associates. The 60-day clock had begun ticking. Jacob arrived in New York City on March 5, 1877, carrying a leather briefcase containing documents that could reshape one of America's most powerful dynasties. He checked into the modest Astor House Hotel under the name Jacob Hartwell, not yet ready to reveal his true identity. For 3 days, he observed the Vanderbilt mansion from a distance, watching the parade of mourners, lawyers, and business associates who came to pay their respects and discuss the transition of power. He noted the increased security around the property and the presence of what appeared to be private investigators monitoring the area. On March 8th, Jacob made his decision. He would present his claim directly to the family's primary attorney, William Backhouse, Jr., whose law firm had handled Vanderbilt business for over 2 decades. Fifth retention. Hook, 50 to 52 minutes. What happened in that law office over the next 48 hours would become the stuff of legend. Because Jacob Hartwell was about to walk into a room and announce that he was entitled to half of the largest private fortune in American history, and the lawyer's reaction would set in motion events that would either establish Jacob as one of the wealthiest men alive or destroy him completely. The stage was set for a confrontation that would shake the foundations of New York society. William Backhouse, Jr. was not a man easily surprised. After 25 years representing the Vanderbilt family, he had handled railroad wars, political corruption scandals, and complex business negotiations that had shaped American commerce. But nothing had prepared him for the moment Jacob Hartwell walked into his Wall Street office on March 9, 1877. "Mr. Backhouse," Jacob began, his voice steady despite the magnitude of what he was about to reveal. "I am here to discuss my inheritance from the estate of Cornelius Vanderbilt." Backhouse's initial reaction was dismissive. "Young man, if you're here seeking employment or claiming some business debt, I should inform you that all such matters are being handled through proper channels." "I'm here," Jacob replied, opening his briefcase, "because I am Cornelius Vanderbilt's son." The silence that followed was absolute. Backhouse, a master of legal composure, found himself staring at the young man with undisguised shock. In his decades of practice, he had encountered fraudsters, con artists, and opportunists of every variety. But something in Jacob's demeanor, the quiet confidence, the careful preparation, the lack of desperation that characterized most inheritance claimants, suggested this was different. "That's quite a claim," Backhouse said carefully. "I assume you have documentation to support such an extraordinary assertion." Jacob placed the first document on the lawyer's mahogany desk, his original birth certificate bearing Cornelius Vanderbilt's signature as father. Backhouse examined it closely, noting the authentic watermarks and official seals that would have been nearly impossible to forge. The second document was Catherine Morgan's sworn affidavit, detailing her relationship with Vanderbilt and the arrangements made for Jacob's care. Backhouse recognized the notary's seal. It belonged to a court official he knew personally, a man of unquestionable integrity. But it was the third document that caused Backhouse to lose his professional composure entirely. A letter in Cornelius Vanderbilt's unmistakable handwriting, addressed to "my son Jacob Vanderbilt," and describing in detail the secret inheritance clause. Backhouse had helped draft Vanderbilt's will personally. He knew every provision, every bequest, every legal nuance. but he had never seen or heard of this secret clause. "Where did you obtain this?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "My father wrote it to me before my birth," Jacob replied. "It was held by my mother until her recent death." Backhouse spent the next 4 hours examining every document, consulting legal references, and making discreet inquiries to verify details. By evening, he reached a conclusion that would change everything. Jacob's claim appeared to be legitimate, but legitimacy and acceptance are two very different things. Because when Backhouse informed the Vanderbilt family of Jacob's claim that evening, their reaction would be swift, decisive, and potentially dangerous. The battle for the Vanderbilt fortune was about to begin, and Jacob had no idea what forces he was about to unleash against himself. The emergency meeting at the Vanderbilt mansion on March 10, 1877, brought together the most powerful business and legal minds in New York. William Henry Vanderbilt, now the family patriarch, sat at the head of the massive dining table that had hosted presidents and foreign dignitaries. Around him sat lawyers, bankers, railroad executives, and private investigators, all united by a single purpose: protecting the Vanderbilt empire from what they saw as the greatest threat it had ever faced. "Gentlemen," William Henry began, his voice carrying the authority of inherited power, "we face a situation that could destroy everything my father built. A young man claiming to be his illegitimate son has presented what appears to be compelling documentation supporting his claim to half of our family's wealth." The reaction around the table was immediate and intense. $50 million represented more than most people could comprehend, enough money to build entire cities, fund wars, or reshape the American economy. Theodore Hartwell, the family's primary business attorney, spoke first. "We need to examine every aspect of this claim. Birth certificates can be forged, relationships can be fabricated, and letters can be counterfeited. There must be flaws in his documentation." But privately, Hartwell harbored deep concerns. He had reviewed the documents personally and found them disturbingly authentic. More troubling was the intimate knowledge the young man possessed about Cornelius Vanderbilt's business practices and personal habits, details that would be nearly impossible for an outsider to fabricate. James Renwick, the family's private investigator, presented his initial findings. The man calling himself Jacob Hartwell has an impressive background: Harvard Law School, successful practice in Boston, impeccable reputation. But here's what's interesting. His entire life story begins in 1849. Before that, nothing. No birth records in Boston, no family connections that can be verified. It's as if he appeared from nowhere as an infant. This revelation sent a chill through the room. Rather than supporting the family's hopes of exposing a fraud, the investigation was revealing evidence that supported Jacob's story. William Henry made a decision that would haunt him for the rest of his life. "We cannot allow this claim to proceed through normal legal channels. Too much is at stake. The publicity alone would damage our business relationships and political connections. We need to resolve this situation quietly and permanently." Over the next 24 hours, the Vanderbilt family's resources were mobilized in ways that demonstrated the true extent of their power. Private investigators began surveillance of Jacob's hotel. Political connections were activated to ensure favorable treatment from judges and court officials. Business relationships with newspaper owners guaranteed that any coverage of the inheritance dispute would favor the established family. But most significantly, arrangements were made for a private negotiation that would offer Jacob a substantial settlement in exchange for his silence and permanent withdrawal of his inheritance claim. The meeting was set for March 13th, 1877, at the Vanderbilt mansion. Jacob would walk into that meeting expecting a discussion about his rightful inheritance. Instead, he would find himself facing an ultimatum that would force him to choose between vast wealth and his own safety. And the choice he made would lead to one of the most mysterious disappearances in American history. March 13th, 1877, dawned cold and gray over New York City. Jacob arrived at the Vanderbilt mansion at exactly 2 p.m., as arranged by William Backhouse's office. He carried with him the leather briefcase containing his documentation and a carefully prepared legal argument supporting his inheritance claim. The mansion's opulent interior reflected the vast wealth that Jacob believed was rightfully half his. Marble columns, crystal chandeliers, and oil paintings by European masters decorated rooms larger than most people's entire homes. As he was escorted to the library, Jacob couldn't help but imagine what his life might have been like if his father had acknowledged him from birth. The library meeting included 5 men: William Henry Vanderbilt, attorney William Backhouse, family business manager Theodore Hartwell, and 2 individuals who were introduced simply as family advisors. Their formal dress and serious demeanor immediately suggested to Jacob that this would not be the straightforward legal discussion he had anticipated. William Henry spoke first. "Mr. Hartwell, or should I say, Mr. Vanderbilt, we have reviewed your documentation thoroughly. While we don't dispute the authenticity of your papers, we believe there is a solution that serves everyone's interests better than a protracted legal battle." He slid a document across the polished mahogany table. "This is an agreement that would provide you with immediate payment of $1 million, along with annual payments of $50,000 for the rest of your life. In exchange, you would renounce any claim to the Vanderbilt name or estate and agree never to discuss your parentage publicly." Jacob studied the offer carefully. $1 million was an enormous sum, enough to make him wealthy beyond most people's dreams, but it represented only a fraction of his legitimate inheritance. "This is generous," Jacob replied diplomatically, "but it doesn't address the fundamental issue. According to my father's own documentation, I am entitled to half of his estate. That would be approximately $50 million, not the $1 million you're offering." The temperature in the room seemed to drop noticeably. One of the family advisors, a man with cold eyes and a scar across his left cheek, leaned forward. "Mr. Hartwell," he said quietly, "sometimes accepting a generous offer is wiser than pursuing what one believes they deserve. New York can be a dangerous city for people who attract the wrong kind of attention." The threat was unmistakable. Jacob realized that this meeting was not a negotiation. It was an ultimatum. "I need time to consider your offer," Jacob said, maintaining his composure despite the growing tension. "Of course," William Henry replied with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Take all the time you need, but remember, generous offers sometimes expire unexpectedly." Jacob left the mansion at 4:30 p.m., his mind racing with the implications of what had just occurred. The Vanderbilt family wasn't just protecting their wealth. They were prepared to use intimidation and possibly violence to prevent his claim from proceeding. He returned to the Astor House Hotel and spent the evening reviewing his options. By law, he had 52 days remaining to present his claim to probate court, but the family's threat suggested they wouldn't allow him that much time. At 11 p.m., Jacob made a decision that would change everything. He gathered his documents, packed a small bag, and prepared to leave the hotel. But first he visited the hotel's business office and sent 3 telegrams, one to his law partner in Boston, one to a journalist friend at Boston Globe, and one to the Manhattan Trust Company requesting access to his father's secret safety deposit box. Hotel staff later testified that Jacob left the Astor House at approximately 11:45 p.m. on March 13, 1877. He was seen walking east toward the financial district, carrying his leather briefcase and a small traveling bag. He was never seen again. By morning, his hotel room had been thoroughly searched by unknown individuals who left no trace of their presence except for the unmistakable signs that every document, every personal item, every clue to Jacob's identity had been systematically removed. The telegrams he had sent were mysteriously lost in transmission. The Manhattan Trust Company claimed no knowledge of any safety deposit box registered to Cornelius Vanderbilt. His law partner in Boston received no communication, and after several days of concern, assumed Jacob had decided to extend his New York business trip. But the most mysterious aspect of Jacob's disappearance was discovered 2 days later. Exactly $1 million was missing from the Vanderbilt family's private vault. The investigation into Jacob's disappearance revealed the true extent of the Vanderbilt family's influence over New York's legal and political systems. Police detective Michael O'Sullivan, assigned to the case, found himself facing obstacles at every turn. Hotel staff, who had initially provided detailed accounts of Jacob's final evening, suddenly claimed to remember nothing. The hotel's guest registry, which should have contained Jacob's signature and Boston address, was found to have several pages mysteriously torn out. The telegrams Jacob had sent could not be traced through Western Union's records. Most frustrating for O'Sullivan was the lack of cooperation from the Vanderbilt family themselves. When he attempted to interview William Henry about the inheritance dispute, he was told by the family's attorneys that no such meeting had ever taken place, and that they had no knowledge of anyone named Jacob Hartwell or Jacob Vanderbilt. It was as if the man had never existed, O'Sullivan wrote in his official report. But you don't investigate missing persons for 20 years without developing instincts about when you're being told the truth. Everything about this case felt wrong. The detectives' investigation did uncover one significant clue. A witness who claimed to have seen Jacob boarding a late-night train at Grand Central Station on the evening of his disappearance. The witness, a railroad conductor named Patrick McMurphy, remembered Jacob specifically because he had paid for his ticket with an unusually large denomination bill, a $500 note that most people never saw in their lifetimes. He seemed nervous, McMurphy testified, kept looking over his shoulder as if he expected someone to follow him, asked specifically for a ticket to Chicago, but paid cash and gave no name for the passenger manifest. The Chicago lead proved to be another dead end. Railroad records showed no passenger matching Jacob's description arriving in Chicago during the relevant time period. Either the witness was mistaken, or Jacob had disembarked at an earlier station. The theft of $1 million from the Vanderbilt vault added another layer of complexity to the investigation. The family's private security discovered the missing money on March 15th, 2 days after Jacob's disappearance. The theft had been conducted with sophisticated knowledge of the vault's security systems, suggesting either inside information or professional criminal expertise. William Henry Vanderbilt publicly blamed the theft on industrial espionage, claiming that business competitors had hired professional thieves to damage the family's financial stability. But privately, family members understood the timing was too coincidental to ignore. Had Jacob somehow managed to steal the money as revenge for their ultimatum? Or had the family arranged the theft themselves, creating a pretext to blame Jacob for criminal activity and justify any actions they might have taken against him? As weeks turned to months, the Jacob Vanderbilt case took on the characteristics of legend rather than investigation. Newspaper accounts varied wildly, with some portraying Jacob as a legitimate heir who had been silenced by powerful interests, while others described him as an elaborate con artist who had fled with stolen money. The truth, as Detective O'Sullivan came to understand, lay somewhere in the complex intersection of legitimate inheritance claims, family desperation to protect their empire, and the corrupting influence of vast wealth on American justice systems. Some cases, O'Sullivan wrote in his final report, reveal more about the people investigating them than the people being investigated. The Jacob Vanderbilt case showed me that in America, enough money can make any inconvenient truth disappear. Today, 147 years after Jacob's disappearance, the mystery remains unsolved. The Vanderbilt family fortune continued to grow throughout the late 19th century, funding mansions, museums, and universities that still bear their name. But family descendants have never publicly addressed the Jacob inheritance claim or provided alternative explanations for the events of March 1877. Historical researchers have uncovered additional evidence supporting Jacob's story. Catherine Morgan's diary, discovered during hotel renovations in 1923, corroborated many details of her relationship with Cornelius Vanderbilt. Birth records from Boston confirmed that no Jacob Hartwell was born there in 1849, supporting the theory that his entire Boston identity was carefully constructed. Most intriguingly, financial records from several European banks show large deposits made by an American client using the name J. Vanderbilt throughout the 1880s and 1890s. These deposits, totaling approximately $1 million over 20 years, suggest that Jacob might have survived his disappearance and lived quietly in exile. Was Jacob Vanderbilt murdered by his own family to protect their inheritance? Did he successfully steal $1 million and escape to build a new life in Europe? Or was he simply another con artist whose elaborate scheme ultimately failed? The answer may never be known, but the Jacob Vanderbilt case remains one of the most compelling examples of how America's Gilded Age fortunes were built and protected through methods that went far beyond simple business competition. In the end, perhaps the most important question isn't what happened to Jacob Vanderbilt, but what his story reveals about the lengths to which powerful families would go to preserve their dynasties. In an era when vast fortunes shaped American politics and society, the disappearance of one inconvenient heir reminds us that some secrets were considered too dangerous to ever see the light of day. If this story has captivated you, please subscribe to our channel for more hidden histories of America's most powerful families. What do you think happened to Jacob Vanderbilt? Share your theories in the comments below and let us know what other historical mysteries you'd like us to investigate. From wherever you're watching, New York, where it all began, Boston, where Jacob grew up, or anywhere in America where the influence of the railroad barons still shapes our landscape, thank you for joining us on this journey into one of history's most intriguing unsolved mysteries.